say I am asexual or I'm kinky, then actually it's no risk for me walking down the street. It's no risk for me that I'm going to be exposed in some way or ever suffer any negative repercussions for this. And yet the identity of queerness allows me to somehow claim that I'm part of the same group as people who risk their lives, and risk all kinds of stuff because of who they essentially are.
The death of God is about the drying up of a horizon of meaning and of a whole form of human life.
Where do we stand in the illusion it makes? What kind of space are we invited into?
The material relations between people become social relations between things. When we look at toasters, corn, and TVs,
we still, to a large extent, live in the interregnum between worlds, if you will, or between paradigms. Not many people in the history of the world have faced that.
Diet Soap is a Sublation Media podcast.
David Swift is the author of A Left for Itself, which we published at Zero Books back in the day. He recently reached out to me. I think you're going to be writing for Sublation magazine, perhaps a pamphlet as well. You want to talk about something that has come up on the channel from time to time. I'll get comments from people who are complaining about what I do, and I always sort of brush it aside and think of it as either these are comments or criticisms done in bad faith, or that there's an underestimation of the working class. But what I was asked recently was like, just who am I making my little critical cuts video essays for? Because it's not for normal people, the person said. I didn't come out of a graduate program. I have a bachelor's degree in philosophy, but most of what I know about Marxism and critical theory, all of it really is self-taught. Even when I was in university, I was not taught left theory or critical theory in university. And yet still, I guess I talk like a graduate student. So what we're going to be talking about today, David wants to talk about how the left is that we're poor dressers. We don't. Our hygiene is questionable, and we're elitists who don't know how to talk to regular people. So those are the two topics. You can go.
Yeah, that's the kind of ballpark. Yeah, fair enough.
Yeah. So why don't we start with the aesthetics of the left, because I think it actually ranges from like being, just sort of sloppy, like Slavoj Žižek in a t-shirt and jeans or something. All the way over to being maybe very mod or fashionable and maybe a little odd, not like fashionable like wearing designer clothes, but like odd ensembles or weird looks.
Yeah, like a sort of designer hipsterism almost. Yeah, that kind of thing. Yeah,
right.
So, yeah, I mean, that's it. Obviously the aesthetics themselves are less important than the reasons that might drive it or motivate it, right? So the example I use in this piece for Sublation magazine is I was at a Palestinian wedding in northern Israel, I think May or June of last year. And it struck me that apart from the fact that there's a lot less alcohol than there would be a Liverpool wedding where I'm from in the UK, the aesthetics of the young people there was quite a sort of global look, if you know what I mean. So the guys were all like well-built gym heads, short cropped hair, look sort of like the people on that show, the Jersey Shore, from about 10 years ago, right? Maybe now in Jersey the looks evolved perhaps, but all muscular guys in tight shirts. The girls look just like sort of Kardashian, Jenners, big asses, big boobs, tight dresses, long extensions, etc., etc. In fact,
this all sounds, like Eden in a way, right? But
well, that's it. I mean, that's it. So it's very interesting because you could be in and definitely. Take a look at, say, Instagram or social media, and you'll notice that there's a sort of international aesthetic that's quite common across different cultures, right? Be you in certain places in the US or Europe, or in this case, Palestine. And, that's the aesthetic for certain people, and good for them. And yeah, just the notable contrast with the sort of Israeli leftists that I associate with, who definitely don't dress like that. The guys are not muscular. The guys are not big gym heads. The girls don't look there. And again, fair play to them. So it's not about the aesthetics themselves, but it's about sort of what lies behind that. And something I actually talk about in my most recent book, The Identity Myth. I don't know if you can see it over my shoulder there, tacitly placed there. It's really important because so many of the groups that the left is ostensibly fighting for or representing do care a lot about stuff like aesthetics and fashion and makeup and how they look, right? Many trans people, for example, obviously, certainly trans women care a lot about makeup and fashion and whatnot. There's a brilliant book that came out in the UK a couple of years ago called Safe, and it's an anthology. It's an edited collection of young black male British writers. And there's this brilliant chapter in one of them, in that book written by one of the authors, where he talks about the lengths that young black British males go to dress up and and make sure that they look good and make sure that the clothes are clean and all the rest of it. And actually, it reminded me of a comment made by the Jamaican author Marlon James a few years ago, who was saying that what his white friends don't get, his left wing, white friends don't get, is that actually he can't just go out at short notice. He needs to spend some time getting ready and getting dressed up and all the rest of it. And again, the so-called white working class, white working class people very often, when they can afford to, even if they can't necessarily afford to, care about stuff like this, how they look and their appearance or whatever. And there's nothing wrong with the fact that clearly so many people on the left do not care about such things and maybe even sort of snobbishly look down on those who do. But it's about, why shouldn't they, right? Why is there this distinction? Why is it so often, in fact, that people on the modern left, in terms of, say, professional activists, the permanently online, etc., why is it that so consistently, they don't look very, muscular and well built? Why are so many people in that sort of environment not looking like, say, trans people or black people or the white working class, etc.? Why is there that distinction? Does that reflect, as we were sort of talking about before, the different reasons why people get into left-wing activism nowadays, compared to, say, in the past, right? Because things such as, labor unions and local government and sort of, grassroots, bottom-up activism is maybe declining compared to how it was in the past. Certainly, higher education is massively expanding, and that's increasingly a route into the left. So, I think that's the issue that that I'm sort of talking about, really, not the actual aesthetics themselves.
All right, then. Why is it that, first of all, is it a cultural divide between the left and what I'll call normies, or is it a class divide? Because my observation, anecdotally, is that upper middle class, like PMC people who are not on the left, dress well. Yeah. They may not all look like they just came out of the gym. They may not try to emulate Kim Kardashian, but they dress in a fashionable way. They wear finer clothes. They have an established look. I can tell if someone's what you would call posh just by whether or not there's any like lint on them, or if everything's perfectly, that's it. Put together. Yeah. So, go ahead.
To answer your question, definitely that's it. It's about distinguishing themselves from the normies, right? And I think the reasons why so many people on the left might want to do this in the first place, and then actually do it and execute it, a cause for concern, I think. So, firstly, it's this idea that increasingly left-wing activists, particularly the mostly online left-wing activists, rather than, say, people who are actually out there making a difference. They tend to,
I'm sorry, that distinction. Go ahead.
I mean, we'll talk a lot more about the permanently online later, perhaps. But certainly they come from a very particular kind of background and strata, etc. And there's a reason why they get into what they're into and stuff. And then secondly, there's also this idea of, well, if the world rejects us and our political values, well, fuck you, the world, right? We're going to turn our back on the world. And I think that's the idea. That's something that is really at stake here, I think, because If you support, say, I don't know, sort of incremental, slow and steady change, the kind of stuff that Joe Biden and congressional Democrats have been trying to do recently, then okay, you might say, all right, no, okay, this isn't great, this isn't perfect, there's a lot to be desired here, but at least it's slowly going in the right direction. If you want to completely turn the world upside down, you want open borders, you want to abolish the family, for example, right? In the UK, if you want to get rid of the monarchy, which is bizarrely still quite a niche point, I thought when the old Queen died, actually support for republicanism would go up. Doesn't seem to have actually. But anyway, if you have the sort of more, I don't know, let's say less popular, and at least in the short term, less attainable objectives, and you are, you're not, it looks very hard to achieve them. Not only that, actually, but so often the very people who you think would support these kind of objectives seem especially, not interested in it. Then, you feel rejected by the world. You think, well, if the world rejects us and our beliefs, then we're just going to turn our backs on the world and we're going to concentrate on ourselves. And this will be represented in our language. This will be represented in our activities. So instead of trying to actually achieve anything or do anything helpful, we're just going to retreat to irony and sort of online attacks and memes. Memes. We'll have our own little language and our own dress codes and our own little mini culture. And that's fine if you're a goth, or a punk or a subculture. If you're a skater or whatever, that's fine. To have your own sort of mini subculture where you dress a certain way and you have certain language and you share certain memes that only your in-group really understands. But if your point is to try and actually affect change and help people, then having this kind of, mini sort of subculture, which it sort of turns its back on the outside and actually deliberately in the way it dresses and the things that it says, tries to create a barrier between itself and the normies, then I think that's a big problem.
All right. So I want to see if I can take a devil's advocate position just to defend myself here a little bit. When it comes to first of all, there's activism that you can do in the world, but often enough, the activism is constrained within a framework of the possible, and the political and politics as it is known now. The aim of revolutionary politics is to create new conditions. First, I'll say that first. So this is me defending the online left and my own project. So in order to do that, part of the project will be to think through and at least try to conceive of what a revolutionary politics would need to accomplish. And that, rather than immediately running out into the fray and being active within the framework of possibility now. So there's a function for a speculative expression that now is mostly online because most writing, most media is online. So what we're talking about is, art and theory. That's the online left. It's not because you can also, I publish books, print books, but even there start with the online media because that's where everybody is getting their media from. So that's what we're talking about is media and expression and intellectual work overall. And that's the online left. So the second thing is on the topic of aesthetics, I feel as though look, I'm older. I come out of Gen X, the do-it-yourself aesthetic that was influenced by the punks and that had a strong left-wing current. I'm in the Pacific Northwest, so while I wasn't like a major figure in any big subcultural movement, I was sort of influenced by them all. Cafe culture, a kind of university culture, but maybe university culture for me of dropouts. And I feel as though in a internationally diverse left, you're going to encounter a lot of different styles that are influenced by where you come from, and also that you may find that whatever the counterculture is in a given area is what's going to absorb aspects of the left. That the revolutionary left will be attracted to countercultures or subcultures because precisely because they want to get distance from what is conceived to be possible. So that's
Well,
why.
I mean, I'd just say two things to this, really. I mean, firstly, I think there's a distinction between online and, in particular, social media, right?
Mhm.
So, for example, there are lots of people whereby I might read their sort of, a long form blog of like 500 or 800 or 1,000 words. I might read their Substack, etc. And I think, okay, yeah, even if I don't necessarily agree with everything this person's saying, I see their points. I think they're being quite persuasive here. I sort of like their attitude, I empathize with them, I see where they come from. And then if I look at that same person's Twitter feed, I think, I hate this person, what an asshole.
Right.
That's a distinction right there, because the nature of social media, in so many different ways, because of the sort of identity curation and projection that's involved, because of the way it's so easy to misread people, or indeed to deliberately misread people and act in bad faith, the way it's, you have these sort of, it corrals people into sort of people who agree with them, and people post stuff that, they know that their followers will agree and amplify and retweet, etc. That's a distinction right there, because social media in particular, rather than just online activity, is what I'm really talking about. Because absolutely, that is whereby I can think of certain British leftists. There's a guy who definitely calls himself a long revolutionary socialist. And again, his whole online activity is just for him and his wife and his friends, and it's extremely annoying. And whatever interesting or solid points he might make are, for me, and I assume many other people, sort of overridden by the fact that there's this sort of obnoxious sort of aesthetic and subculture around them, really, which is almost like this is our thing. It's like it's for us and it's our thing. And as I say, if that's like an interesting band that you're into, or a obscure Italian fashion company or whatever, that's great. But when it's politics and when it's revolutionary socialism and meant to change the world, who's it for or what's it for? And again, that's my second point there. When we're talking about these revolutionary politics, who is it for, right? Who is it aimed at? Is there any indication that there's a big group of people out there that might want this? Who are you doing it for, right? Is because I completely take the point that you, to achieve many things, you need to change common sense. You need to change, cultural hegemony and all the rest of it. You need to create new conditions of what is assumed to be possible. Absolutely brilliant. Fair enough. But for whom and why? For what? Is there any indication that there are people out there that might actually want this different kind of world? A large group of people anyway.
Mm-hmm.
Is it just something that is just that you and your friends or people from a certain background, from a certain milieu might want? Who are you doing this for? Right? What's the whole point? Is it just like an interesting intellectual project, or is it the kind of thing that is meant to be popular one day? What's the whole point of it? So, I mean, just interestingly mentioned before about Slavoj Žižek, which again, great, he's a philosopher, so absolutely we would expect him to not give a damn about certain things and not want to appeal to a mass audience or whatever. That's his job, almost quite literally. He's meant to.
Yeah, but in the case of Slavoj Žižek, he's called the Elvis of cultural theory, and his lectures are probably, despite being in some ways difficult, and people often will say they don't understand what he's saying, and I think that's for a combination of reasons. One, his Slovenian accent and speech impediment, and then two, because he's speaking in a contradictory way. So he's not even necessarily using a lot of jargon, but he's saying things that require you to stop and think. But nonetheless, despite all of that, I think he is one of the more successful leftist philosophers in terms of reaching a mass audience, being able to be interesting and attractive to a broader array of people.
Yeah, definitely. And so a friend of mine, Niall, that hi, if you're watching this, Niall, he's actually got a T-shirt with Zizek's face on it. So he's definitely got it.
I have one of those. I have one of those.
So he's, as you say, he's got a lot of cut through there. Absolutely. But the thing is, though, he's a philosopher, and that's his whole thing, is to consider what might be possible and all the rest of it. He's not claiming that he is at the vanguard of any particular kind of movement. He's not even implicitly saying that he necessarily represents anyone other than himself, right? But the people that I'm talking about, their whole attitude is us, this usually upper middle class, overwhelmingly white, overwhelmingly, straight, cisgender, heteronormative people actually do either explicitly or implicitly say, no, we are for Black Americans, we are for Palestinians, we are for trans people. That's who we're about. That's from where we get our justification. That's who they are, for whom we are doing this for, if that's grammatically correct.
Yeah.
So that's the difference between these kind of activists that I'm talking about and someone like Zizek, who, as you say, is very successful at getting across, sort of Marxist ideas to a broader non-philosophical audience like my friend Niall. So that's the distinction there, because I don't think Zizek thinks that he, or claims to necessarily speak for, particularly any one of them. So I don't think he claims to be a representative of even the Slovenian working class or anything like that. Never mind African Americans or trans people or whatever. So I think that's the distinction between, say, philosophers, for example, and people who are meant to be or ostensibly leading some kind of movement for actual, to achieve political or social change.
Well, okay. So then there's a second way that I'll try to defend the anti-corporate aesthetic of a kind of slacker left, a left that dresses in t-shirts and doesn't necessarily hit the gym, at all, or as regularly as they should, and so on. And that's to say that the culture that embraces the look of Kim Kardashian and a more contemporary aesthetic around beauty for men and women is the culture that can most easily be absorbed by merchandising in the corporate world. And also, it's interesting that to the degree to which that culture is coming out of Black America, and I think these days it, to the large degree, is that it does not in any way protect it against commodification or make it an aesthetic that is anything other than conservative. And I recently was in Brooklyn and went to Brooklyn Museum of Art, and there was an exhibit, a short-term exhibit of a Black artist whose name now escapes me. But he was a friend of Kanye West, and I wanted to go in and see his work, and I went in, and there were rows and rows of Nike shoes and Abercrombie and Fitch luggage, and it was all about what was called negritude in the exhibit. The idea that Black Americans have a particular aesthetic based on being counter to what I'll call, instead of white culture, just the Enlightenment ideal of progressive, pragmatic, or humanist and universal culture. So, like, there was a facsimile of a log cabin in the exhibit, and all the boards were off kilter, and it's like, this is how Black people like to live, where I guess every room has a draft and rain comes in through the roof.
I read about that. I read actually a review of that exhibition. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And so that these two ideas that this very strong kind of warped identity politics and this aesthetic of corporate beauty were not in opposition to each other. In this exhibit, There was Nike shoes, designer clothes, designer luggage, all in the name of progressive Black Lives Matter.
Well, quote unquote progressive, right? Exactly.
Right.
But this is so definitely. I mean, lots of sort of Black academics and writers have been talking about this for a while. Like Paul Gilroy, the Black British sociologist and philosopher, for at least 30 years has been writing about this. The late Toni Morrison and Bell Hooks as well, off the top of my head, said, it's ironic actually that some of the people, Black, white, all over the world, who have, suffered the most under capitalism are often the keenest to embrace, consumerism and money and profit and that kind of, go by your own bootstraps kind of attitude. Yeah. So that's a great point right there. So the point I'm making is not about aesthetics, right? There's nothing wrong with being a slacker, and there's definitely nothing wrong with, not dressing or looking like Kim Kardashian. I'm definitely not criticizing that. My point is, though, if say, the online left was a genuinely diverse, diffuse group, you'd expect to see at least some, meathead Jersey Shore types there, right? You'd expect to see some, young black guys who want to dress like Kanye West, rather than the black guys who dress like sort of nerds and are all sort of postgraduates in college, whatever. You'd expect just to have an aesthetic diversity, which isn't there. That's one problem. The second problem is, okay, fine. If you not accept then that you are distinct, not merely aesthetically, because that's quite superficial, but accept that you are sort of distinct in a class sense, in an intellectual sense, and in a political sense from the people that you claim to sort of represent or be fighting for. Think about what implications that might have for your own politics, if any, maybe not. But also think about what implications that has for what you can achieve and what you were even trying to do and who it might be for. So something else which I think I mentioned in this article for Sublation is a distinction, not just, so let's move away from aesthetics now, in terms of sort of sensitivity, right? And, your attitude to physical violence, right? So many of us on the left, obviously, we are usually not very violent people, right? We are not used to fighting or brawling, be it, back in high school or outside a football match, UK football matches, in pubs or bars, etc. But we're not used to physical violence. We're not comfortable. We're not the kind of people who get involved with that kind of stuff. Again, big change from the past, right? In the 1930s, obviously, many on the left, through necessity, had to fight a lot, Black Panthers, stuff like that, later on. So that's, again, a bit of a change in the history of the left. The problem there is, you can't, it's a natural human instinct to assume that other people are like us, right? And so if you have a left which is almost entirely composed of sort of sensitive intellectual types like ourselves, intellectual in inverted commas or that, but still, we tend to think, therefore, on the left, that most people actually are sensitive intellectual types, and of course that's not the case, right? Humanity is incredibly diverse, and some people are very smart, some people are very stupid, and stupidity, intelligence are dispersed amongst the population pretty randomly. Some people actually quite like physical violence, and used to it, etc. So it also it affects our thinking about the world and about what is possible and what other people might want, from a social or political or economic system. If the sort of people who are, dominate left-wing activism are themselves quite unusual, not just aesthetically, because, it's quite superficial, but in terms of what they like to do in their spare time, in terms of their whole sort of attitude to the world, in terms of their sort of life of the mind, if you like, I just think about like crime and punishment, stuff like this. Like, I can't imagine, unprovoked beating someone up, right? And I'm sure you can't. Hopefully, maybe provoked if you hate the person, But I just can't imagine being the kind of person who assaults people, or tortures or rapes or murders people. But obviously, there are lots of people like that in the world, and as we see from the fact that very often people from quite elite backgrounds do this, there are lots of rapists, who went to expensive schools and who, earn lots of money in finance or whatever. There are lots of violent people from that background as well. There are plenty of people out there who are like that, right? And so hence I would say that police abolitionism, as well as being a completely toxic slogan or policy, is not a good idea, no matter how great our socioeconomic system, because there are always going to be violent people, even if you have, a much more sort of a much fairer and more just economic system than we do have today. But because, so many of us on the left are people like us, maybe, who are, these sensitive types who can literally just can't imagine like being this kind of aggressive person, we sort of assume, well, are there really many people out there like that? Is there, surely, when people are like that, it's because of just because of poverty, or it's just because of, I don't know, police provocation or whatever, So this is the thing as well, it's not the aesthetics are like the visible representation of it. But really what I'm trying to talk about here is the distinction in every other sense between so many of us who are on the left and involved in left-wing activism and the world at large.
Well, listen, we should not dwell too long on the question of police abolition, but I want to address it, and I'm just going to speculate about this for a moment. Like, I imagine that in the world of communism, let's say, and after the revolution, that we will still need to employ people in some way, in whatever force, that act the way that TV detectives do, that investigate murders, because I imagine the kinds of crimes that will be left are the kinds of crimes that we love to watch now. A man murders his wife. A jealous artist kills off his rival. There's a chess tournament and the champion knows he's going to lose, and so he kills the opposition. I think that kind of murder is like maybe built into the human condition, where you have these animosities that arise and people act out and do crazy things for egotistical reasons based on their character. But then there's the everyday kind of low-level crimes that have to do with crimes of property and crimes that come out of poverty. There's also political crimes, politically motivated crimes that actually aren't dealt with by the domestic police. And I think those sorts of crimes will be diminished, almost abolished after socialism. So that, we just have to reframe the way we think about the future, but we don't. But then the real question is, what do we do now? Because we're trying to organize the working class to change society. If we believe that the revolution will come from the working class, which is debated, but if we believe that, then how do we relate to the needs of the working class today? And the working class today have demonstrated over and over again that they would like security in their homes, and they would like to live even in areas that are not affluent, with peace. And when they want the people who go around robbing other people or murdering other people to be locked up, they don't want gangs in their area. They don't want broken windows even. And I think these are understandable. And
again, that whole issue hits on exactly what I'm talking about, right? Because for those in the online left who push abolitionism, who are you talking to? What is the purpose here? What are you trying to do? Are you genuinely trying to say, okay, just asking questions, this is for the future, this is theoretical, this is speculation? Really though? Or, isn't it just like a sort of fan club? It's like fan fiction for Harry Potter or something. It's like online people who meet up and talk about this stuff, and it's got no basis in reality. It's like a circle jerk kind of thing. And again, I think it touches on as the distinction between, like, I don't know, what is desirable and what is possible, if that makes sense. So again, like it's definitely not desirable for me that people dress like the Kardashians, for example. But I think it's interesting that obviously a lot of people want to do that, and I think the left needs to sort of understand and accept that is the case, and think about maybe what the implications might be for politics to it, even if it's not necessarily desirable. So
I don't even find it undesirable for women to dress like Kim Kardashian, or for men to get buff and dress like whoever that might be.
No. So, sure. I mean, what I think is undesirable is maybe if there's pressure on, especially like young girls and young men, to look a certain way, right? So it's probably worse for young girls than for young men. Although I think even, again, maybe, we're too old for this perhaps, but I think definitely young teenage men nowadays, or boys, I think with social media and Instagram and stuff, apparently there's been a big increase in body dysmorphia amongst them, but it's much worse amongst women.
Yeah. So, okay. Like there's I feel like the left's emphasis on mental illness and lack of the embrace of undisciplined life, or the fear about body shaming. I'm overweight. I am the last one to be able to talk about this, really. But I feel like maybe it's okay for people to say, I want my body to be in better shape than it is, and I want to look better than I normally do, and even I want to be sexy. That's fine. The problem arises when I think teenagers only know how to create social bonds and intimacy in these hypersexualized ways, perhaps, or through displays of beauty and power, where there's not enough of connection between people to develop real friendships beyond that. And I don't think that's at all limited to normies or working class people. I think we have an alienated society. But let's get back to the aesthetic question, because to me, this is something I wrestle with as someone who wants to reach a mass audience for a variety of reasons, right? Not just out of the goodness of my heart or anything, but to sell more books, to get more views, and also finds myself drawn to a kind of aesthetic or sensibility, which is second nature to me now at 52, and which I don't know, like that I kind of want to pretend like I can communicate to anyone, even if they don't like it in the first place. I can figure out a way to explain why something is of value. Like I'm about to make a video about Laurie Anderson. You know who Laurie Anderson is? Probably not. He was a performance artist in New York City in the 80s who had a top 40 hit and therefore became a kind of pop cultural phenomenon, but a low-key one. And she's very much came out of the New York avant-garde and had a moment. She married Lou Reed.
Okay.
But later in like the late 90s and early 2000s, they were married. And I feel like there's something in her work that is of use to people who want to think critically, but it doesn't seem to me in any way working class. And I also wonder how the split between the countercultural and the working class arose. Like, weren't the countercultural movements working class movements often, like the punk scene, or even in Bohemia? Was it always petty bourgeois? What?
I think, well, it depends what you mean by counterculture, right? And it's not something I know enough about, but I think it's, because definitely I think if you go back to the 1950s, right, a lot of the sort of counterculture there, like greasers and stuff, and like mods and rockers in the UK and stuff like that, very often, absolutely, they were working class movements. It was, again, very much about fashion and how you dressed and all that kind of stuff, and music and all these things they took very seriously. I think maybe then hippies were actually more of a sort of university-based movement and were more middle class. And then again, punks in many ways a reaction against hippies, where again, I think generally more sort of working class in their origin. And yeah, I read a really interesting book recently. I think it was called The Hard Hat Riots, or it was about the Hard Hat Riots in the US, in New York, and the reaction to them. I don't know, it was a really good book. And it was on exactly that topic. It's a shame I can't remember the book's name right now, but it was basically about that. It was about exactly that, and it looked at the sort of the bridge, or the sort of when this sort of dichotomy opened up in the sort of early 70s, late 60s, but early 70s in particular, between the sort of countercultural movement and the anti-Vietnam War movement, etc., on the one hand, and then this increasingly sort of small C conservative. Working class, the sort of the drift in labor unions towards small C conservatism, etc. Really interesting book, which is on exactly that topic. And obviously, it's a massive shame that it happened. And in some ways, and this is like one of the laments of the book, actually. We should look up what this is called, because it talks about exactly that. It's another world could have been possible, actually, if, the left, as it were, was able to keep together both the sort of the sort of 68, the Suissant Huitards or whatever, the 68ers, the students, the civil rights movements, the LGBT movements, etc., and was actually able to keep them in the same movement as organized labor, which unfortunately they were not. And early 70s, that whole thing split apart. And that's a hell of a shame. And I think now, actually, in the US as well as the UK, actually, there's all this now new unionism, if you like, say McDonald's workers and Uber drivers and DoorDash people and stuff like that, or Deliveroo drivers in the UK. So I think that's interesting, because maybe now with this sort of new unionism based on sort of, the gig economy and stuff, and obviously this new unionism is by nature much more diverse than, say, steel workers and the Teamsters, etc. in the 70s, right? It's obviously young and old, college graduates, college students, obviously black, white, Hispanic, Asian, etc. So maybe now, actually, and again, given the sort of more diffuse nature of culture as well, and the fact that we don't really have a counterculture as much because there's just so many cultures, I think maybe nowadays it might be easier to harness or I don't know, to build a movement which is both based on sort of labor rights and sort of socioeconomic redistributive objectives, but also actually harnesses sort of, fandom and, various kinds of cultures together. And again, I think a problem is if it's difficult to do this if you sort of shut yourself away from these kinds of popular cultures. If for whatever reason you sort of consider them a bit beneath you, or the language that you use when you talk about them is ridiculously technical and abstract and obtuse. Again, this guy I referred to before, by the way, who calls himself this long revolutionary socialist, and his whole online thing is just about him and his friends. He made this viral tweet last year. He was talking about a soccer game or something, football, British football. And okay, he's a football fan. He supports Southampton FC in the UK. And just the language that he used in this, I mean, he was making, I forget what the point was. The point was solid enough. But just the language that he used was just so ridiculous in terms of the sort of abstraction of the language and his choice of words, that the tweet went completely viral, and it got more attention than any blog post or anything this guy's ever done ever. More working class people read that one tweet and pissed themselves laughing at it than anything else that guy has ever written before.
What did he say? Do you remember what he said precisely?
I don't know. It's the same as the name of this book. Do you think I can look it up now, or will it?
Yeah. I can edit. I'll be editing this.
Okay. Let me have a look at this. Let me look this up. Yeah, because he tweets often about football and stuff, and maybe this is the irony is, he is a genuine football fan, but the way he sort of wrote about it, just everyone just started laughing at him, and it just sort of goes. Let's see. I'm trying to find this.
What's this guy's name?
So he's called Tom Gann, and he edits something called the New Socialist magazine. It's an online magazine in the UK. And yeah, I don't think I'm going to be able to find this necessarily, because I don't know where it is. Because he writes quite a bit, or he tweets quite a bit about football. But it was just this sort of. I think he was talking about the Euro 2020. So it must have been 2 years ago now, in 2021. It was the delayed European Nations Football Championship. Can't remember what the point was.
This guy is it Thomas J. Gunn, the misanthropic socialist Republican? Is that it?
I don't think there's a J in there. I think it's just Tom_Gunn is his Twitter handle.
Okay.
But anyway, so unfortunately I'm not going to be able to find it. But so he wrote this tweet, something to do with football, soccer. And again, there's a point in there somewhere. But just the sort of language that he used was just so. I mean, this is a guy who uses the word elegant in its original meaning all the time. It's really weird. Like he always says, "Oh, such an elegant point," and he doesn't mean elegant as sophisticated. It's just an absolute asshole. And again, it got more attention or more traction online than anything he's ever heard before. And all kinds of just ordinary British people who obviously don't know anything about online socialism, whatever, just ordinary football fans, sports fans, just. Laughing at him basically and saying how ridiculous is this guy, or people thought it was a parody because they thought, oh, is this like a really clever pun of somebody deliberately writing, taking the piss out of the online left? No, he was being completely genuine. And sort of that's the problem there, right? It's like, do you have to use this sort of language? Do you have to have this kind of aesthetic, be it in your own physical appearance, your own hobbies, your own activities, or literally the language that you use, which is almost perfectly designed to to distance yourself, not just from people in general, but from the very people that you're supposedly trying to reach out to and you're supposedly fighting on behalf of. Mm-hmm. I'm going to have to try and find this tweet afterwards, and I'll send it to you because.
Yeah. Well, right. I definitely feel like there's I feel a little conflicted. On the one hand, like as a writer and as some sort of, let's out there say, artist, I feel like I want to aim at elegance, and at originality, and at some sort of even to develop something a bit new. I am in my past I was attracted to, and still I'm attracted to, kind of dissident avant-garde kind of art, the surrealists, artists. In the 80s, people who would make audio collages and electronica and all that kind of somewhat abstract and intellectualized art. But I know that is never going to be exactly what is the most popular art.
Yeah.
But I also feel as though it works well with the aim of trying to inspire thinking beyond the immediate to create works that are aesthetically aligned with that. So balancing that with some humility, I think, and at least attempting to be as accessible as possible. And is the only way I can overcome the problem in my own work. But it seems to me that you're talking about something larger than my work and also larger than conscious aesthetic choices. And we're coming up at 45 minutes, and this is normally a point where what I would do is break and then put the second half of our conversation behind a paywall for the Patreon. Can you stick around for another 45 minutes and we could talk about the way like education and class is the real basis for this.
If you enjoyed this conversation, please do consider supporting us on Patreon. Our patrons help to make sure that Sublation Media can continue to provide interviews, videos, books, and articles that are critical of the left from the left. If you are tired of remaining stuck within bourgeois ideologies and politics, help us sublate them both.